For that. So we've got Phil come on up to the table here. And what I'll do is just go ahead and tell you a little bit about Phil, and then we're going to launch into a video, and then he will walk us through a couple of slides and information. But Phil Koonz and his wife Debbie moved from Kansas to Galena in 2000. He works for the Louden Tribal Council as an environmental technician and has been involved with the Galena Wood Energy Project since about 2009. Now get this, his hobbies: hillbilly architecture, home brewing, grandkids, and collecting junk vehicles. He's an Alaskan's Alaskan. So with that, if we could cue up the video, and then we'll just ask Phil to come up directly afterwards to continue.
Even before the flood came around, the community was pretty intensely aware of the importance of managing our energy costs. And the flood is sort of an opportunity to, if you're already going into a building to redo some things that were damaged by the flood, it makes sense to, do it better than it was before.
A lot of the public buildings in Galena were built as part of the Air Force infrastructure. And a lot of these buildings were built, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when fuel oil was about $1 a gallon or even less. So they weren't necessarily designed for efficiency. They were designed for a mission to house troops and provide a base of operations for the Air Force. But they're older and they're still structurally sound. They just need to be retrofitted to be made more efficient.
Galena is unique in that we have a boarding school here that's not typical for a rural Alaskan community. We have 200 kids going to school here from all over the state, and if we have to spend a significant portion of our budget on heating buildings, then that's dollars taken away from educating our kids and offering them opportunities. And it makes so much more sense to be able to free up those dollars and steer them towards educational opportunities.
Because every single person was affected, I think everybody has the mindset of rebuilding and doing things the right way, both by elevating and getting things up higher, but also, everybody pays their energy bills, and heating oil is around $6 a gallon, and people, that are thinking about the future realize there's an opportunity now to do it so that you're using less energy down the road.
It's a really positive thing to be a part of, to not just be putting your community back together, but making it better and stronger than ever, because, we ought to recognize that it's our kids that are going to be living here in the future, and what do we want it to look like for them? We want it to be as easy for them to live here and raise their families as possible.
Yeah, here we go. This is the marina in front of our house. After the flood, we saw John Cora and Brad Scotton talking on the film a few minutes ago. Jack Abear of Cold Climate Housing Research came to town, and we stood in the street and talked about what we want for Galena. And one of the things was that the town is basically made of crappy housing. And then at that moment it was flooded crappy housing. We wanted to replace it with something better. Next slide, please. I don't know who's got the clicker. Maybe I do. Anybody have nightmares about this kind of thing? Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I've just got a few pictures here of some of the housing, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit. Oh, sorry. Well, the first slide, the next slide, is a house that Jack built. This is the Cold Climate Housing Research designed house. The walls are 2 feet thick. It was a real challenge to get it done. There was no piling drill in town that year. The house that this replaced was sitting like down in a lake that was basically up to the top of the windows. Stayed that way for several months. It was owned by a single mother, professional, very responsible person. She was highly motivated to get the house replaced. This was a priority. The pilings were installed by a company that was in town to do some geophysical research for the Air Force cleanup project. They were done for free. Most of the freight came in for free. Jack got the trusses prefabbed and shipped in. Actually worked on it himself. You can probably see his fingerprints on some of those studs there. This was what we expected would be done all over town. As it happened, only one of them got finished, and they moved in about January. It's a highly efficient house. The outside's covered with steel siding. Trying to find one that's similar. Yeah, like that. I took pictures of some of these because the one of the programs was what they call mitigation, to elevate the houses above the flood level. This one was particularly low. It's kind of not a very suitable house for, what do I keep doing here? For saving, because it wasn't built by a carpenter, it was built by a teacher. And if you look, the floor is about 24 feet span, that it's unsupported in the middle. They stripped it after the flood and left it open. It's not a super insulated house. Those pilings are kind of tall and insecure. This is kind of one of the things we hope to avoid when we did the mitigation or the rebuilding. This is John Corda's house. Notice that those are 12-inch square logs. It's a terrific house, really well built and really well rebuilt. The water was up to about the top of those windows, the bottom floor windows. What they did with this one was to jack it up and put new pilings over the old ones and weld them on at the bottom, and then screw jacks on top. John tells me that if somebody closes a cabinet door, you can feel it all over the house. If somebody rolls over in bed, it wakes the rest of them up. It needs to be cross-braced, just a minor issue with how these things were done. Here's another house on high pilings. It's another very nice log house. I have a log house. Funny thing, when Katie was briefing me for this, she said, stress plain old dumb and simple, which is a phrase I use, and I said I can do that. Dumb and simple is my middle name. Log houses can be fairly efficient. 4 square walls. The walls actually occupy about 15% of the surface of the house. So if you put a tight roof and floor on a log house, it's a pretty good house. This one is 2 stories, mine's not. I can heat for my house, built by drunken hillbillies. We we say that frequently. From green trees with lumber that was milled in the yard, no sheetrock, no plywood in the entire place. It takes about 3 quarts a year to heat the house. In terms of fossil fuel, that's around $1,000. Can I just have a show of hands of who can do that with your house? $1,000 a year? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my benchmark. If you can do better than that, it's a pretty good house, and I think the cold climate houses will all do that. This one probably will. I want to tell a story about this house because it's the same as this one. These people had a really crummy house. It was demolished. They got their FEMA disaster relief money and bought this kit from Spinard's. Cheap kit. You can see it's just sitting on dunnage. They just threw some stuff down on the ground and put up a house and moved in. And this was, I think, the other house that got built during the same summer as the flood. What happened afterwards was when the mitigation came along, the rebuilding was done by religious-based organizations, including Samaritan's Purse and United Methodist Volunteers in Mission, SAMIs and UMVIM, as they're called. They picked up that house, put pilings under it, covered the whole thing with foam, put new steel siding on. It's a nice house now. The reason I point that out is because this is exactly what I didn't want to see in Galena. More crap housing. When the religious-based, volunteers came along, they just fixed it. My story about this is that it's always been a mental exercise for me. How do you put a foundation under an existing house? And my theory is that they came along with a giant forklift and picked it up and kind of threw it up in the air and then put the pilings in real quick and then caught the house and set it back down. I didn't see that, so maybe they thought of something else, but you can see this has happened all over town. Some of them turned out pretty well. These people came out ahead on the flood in spite of their best efforts to build a crap house. How do I get back to the slides? Anybody know? Thank you. I don't see any more that need to be looked at. This is an example of good reconstruction, marginal, good save, another good save, and another one. This was my son parked in the yard next door to our place. It was a good experience, oddly enough. I wouldn't have missed it. Any questions?
All right, thank you.